Okay, so now we'll finish the part in RAID which was left. We started with RAID 0, which was uh, what kind of redundancy? Zero redundancy, but the capacity was increased by a factor of the number of drives you're using. So n into c. Uh, the second kind of RAID level which we saw was RAID 1, which is mirroring, where you're keeping two copies of all the data. And we assume that the disks are going to be fail stop, which means that they either work or they don't work, and if they don't work, then we know that they're not working. In terms of two disks, we'll basically have a view which looks something like the following. In terms of four disks, we'll have block 0 going to disk 0 and 1, block 1 going to disk 2 and 3. And we discussed that in the worst case, only a single disk is allowed to fail. But in the best case, we can have two disks fail. Let's say disk 0 and disk 2 fail. 10 by 2 can fail in that case. What is the capacity of RAID level 1? Given n drives and capacity of each of them being C. NC by 2. And how many disks can fail? 1 or n by 2. What is the throughput? Sequential write is n by 2 into s, because that's the available capacity we have to mirror. Sequential read is also going to be the same. Random write again is the same. Random read is n cross r. Why is this the case? So when you're reading sequentially, you'll read 0, 1. You'll have to skip one block here, right? But if you're reading randomly, you can make use of the full resources. And in parallel, like, hopefully you'll be able to make all possible connections, like all the possible drives can be utilized with all possible instances of time. Maybe not in the worst case, but in an average case, you can have something like n cross r. In terms of latency, again, Rohit was asking this question last time. Right? Should it be D or should it be more than D? And as we discussed last time, so it should be for which one we discussed? Random read or random write? So in terms of writes, maybe sequential or random writes, it will be slightly more than D. It will be probably because you have to write it at two different locations. Now the worst of these two will be the time taken. So it can be something D or it can be at max 2D. But in the general case, it will be something between D and 2 in terms of the latency.
So if you have to write in two places?
Assuming they both happen in parallel. But the worst case could be that one of them is slightly slower than the other. Okay, so in terms of crashes, so let's say that this is the view of the disk at this point of time. So it looks synchronized, right? At this point of time, it looks like proper RAID 1. If we write A to 2, so now this 0 becomes, let's say we first write to disk 0, and then let's say we write to disk 1. We write T to 3. Disk 1 becomes T. Now you can write in either order. And let's say there is a crash at this point. So crash means, let's say that the operating system failed or something bad happened. So what do you think will be the value of, which of them should be assumed to be the correct value? It's in some kind of indeterminate state, right? And let's say after rebooting your disk now. So which of them would you want to put?
Most recently.
Sorry?
Most recently.
Assuming we can get to know that. So the other way to look at this is to use non-volatile RAM. So RAID is now a complex system. It just doesn't use volatile memory. It also has the possibility of using non-volatile RAM. So if you look at non-volatile RAM, you can now see that which of them was the most recently put back. So non-volatile means that even after rebooting, it will retain its value. So we look at RAID 0 and RAID 1. RAID 0 is high on the capacity, but it comes at the cost of very low or zero reliability. RAID 1 has reduced capacity, in fact half the capacity of RAID 0, but it comes at a better reliability. Not a very better reliability given that in the worst case it's also only a single disk is allowed to fail. But what we're now proposing is, can we use something in between RAID 0 and RAID 1? And the idea is to not duplicate each of the single write, but to use parity. So have you read about parity, bits for parity somewhere else? Theoretical folks you also read. So in which context have you used parity? Digital systems. Okay, good. Yeah, very good. So the simplest way to look at this idea is that if we have n variables and n minus 1 are known, we can solve for the n. But there are of course limits to this, right? We cannot use this in all the cases. Depends on whether it's an over-dependent or under-dependent system. Under-constrained or over-constrained system. So for example, let's say we have 5 disks, and this is one particular strike. So we reserve one of the disks, let's say disk 4, as a parity disk, where we store the parity contents. So a simple version of parity disk would be that we just add the contents of all of them. So this is what is the parity which is stored in disk 4? 9, right? So what happens if disk 1 fails? Can we recover this value? It's easy to recover this value because we know that the disk 4 parity sum should be 9. One of them has failed, it should be 3. If disk P fails in this case, again it's fairly easy to estimate that it should be 3, 4, it should be 1. What if disk 4 fails? Just the sum of them. So disk 4 failing is almost equivalent to the other disks failing. So how many disks can fail in this system? Can there be a case in which more can fail? Sorry?
If you have like replicate this and then
Yeah, but that's not RAID 4. So in RAID 4, you won't have only one disk is allowed to fail. Okay, so we can use various different functions to compute parity. One of them which we saw was just to add all the blocks. But since we generally deal only with binary data, so one of the simplest functions to compute parity is the XOR function. So XOR will look at the number of zeros and ones, and if there is an even number of zeros, the parity will be 0. If there is an odd number of ones, the parity will be 1. So one simple way to remember this is that the end of the exercise. So if you look at after the parity, if you look at the total number of ones should be even once you've added parity. But this is for a single bit. In a disk, we'll not have a single bit, right? We'll be storing, each block might contain a number of blocks. So each block might contain 8 bits, 32 bits, or 64 bits, 4K blocks. It could be any size. So the same formula is repeated on a bit by bit basis. So in this case, let's say disk 0 is 0, 0, disk 1 is 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. The first parity bit of disk 4 would be the XOR of 0, 0, 1, and 1, which is going to be 0 given that it is an even number of ones. And for the second bit would be an XOR of 0, 1, 0, and 1, which will again be 0 given that there is an even number of ones. So now we can recover each bit given the parity and the sum and the other bits. Okay, what is the capacity of RAID 4?
n minus 1c.
Okay. Does everyone agree to this? N minus 1c? Okay, Hardeep, how many of these can fail? How many disks can fail in RAID 4? 1. Okay, good. Okay, throughput. What is the throughput of a sequential write, Samit? it's not a complex answer. Okay, n minus 1 into s. Why is that the answer? One reason is that because I showed it on the slides. Okay, so can anyone guess how writing would be done, how sequential writing would be done on the RAID 4 system?
The first time the parity bit will be done the sequential.
So one particular implementation which I read is that you look at all the corresponding bits, you compute the parity, and then you write them all together. So now you're writing n into s in one go, but out of them the useful one is only n minus 1. So for sequential write it's n minus 1 into s. Similarly for sequential read it will be n minus 1 into s, because again that's the useful bandwidth in some sense. Random read would again be the same. Random write. So think of random write. What should be the throughput? Think for 2-3 minutes. Work it out on your notebook. Till the time I'm removing the virus definitions.
So, is parity bit available to the user?
Yeah. By what do you mean by the user?
Can we access it or is it for the calculation within the range?
Yeah, you can use. Whether you can or you not, so that's immaterial. I think the operating system can do that. So this is based on what the throughput of the operating system is.
So there's output from the
Yeah, you can use the parity bit. Yeah.
So when you change it, how does the change in parity bit happen? Is there an adder within the?
So there can be multiple algorithms. One is subtractive, one can be an adder. So you can use either and you can tell me the answer. So first, before telling the answer, can someone come and tell the algorithm? Or work out an algorithm on the board with the help of an example. If you have to write something randomly, how will the algorithm work? Okay, so this is a question. Let's say we had 0, 1, 1, 1 in 4 of these disks, and the parity would be calculated as 1 because we want across the stripe. I want to write 0 in this position because now this is a random write. I'm writing at any random position. This is different from sequential write, where all these will be together changed. Okay, so if I have to write a 0, what all changes do I need to make now? Parity will change. So you will change the parity to 0. How will you know that you need to change the parity to 0? XOR of it. So you will compute an XOR again. Why not? So that's also an algorithm, right? So let's look at the trivial algorithm. Trivial algorithm will, let's say that you now change the value. Now it will do an XOR of read this, read this, read this, and the new value. So it will require 3 reads plus the new value, do an XOR, and then a write. And then again, so this also write. So 2 writes and 3 reads in this particular case. Okay, so this is one additive method. There's another method, subtractive method. Now can you think of something which requires lesser than 3 reads and 2 writes? So 2 writes are definitely required. Could you reduce the number of reads? Using
one. So just read that parity bit and it's all 0, 1 and 1.
Yeah, good, excellent. So what we need to do is that we look at this bit, we look at the parity bit. So we look at the old value. If the new value is the same as the old value, then we don't need to change anything. If the new value is different, we just do a complement of the parity bit, right? And how many reads do we require for that? So you read in the old value, you read in the parity, 2 reads, number of writes you write in here, you write in here. So 2 reads and 2 writes. This is better than 3 reads and 2 writes. What if this was, instead of 4 disks, this was 20 disks? What is the number of reads required for the first case? 19, right? N minus 1. and for the second method, 2. So the second method is more scalable. It's independent of the number of disks. That is why we preferred the second method. But you could, of course, for trivial cases, you could prefer the first one. So when would you prefer the first method? For what number of disks? 3 or 2, right? 1 disk also. Okay, so having now known this, that it requires 2 reads and 2 writes, can you now tell me the throughput per random write? Okay, are you seeing me a number? N minus 1 R by 2. Okay. Brother? N minus R by 2 into R by 4. Okay, so there is some R by 4, which is good. Deepak? Rohit? N into R by 4. Okay, so on. Give me any number. Don't worry about the answer. So none of you are correct at this point of time. So give something else which the others haven't given. It has to have a divided by 4. Just randomly guess. 5 भी डाल देते Really? Yeah. Okay, so interestingly, the answer to this is independent of n. Now, can you tell me the answer? R by 4. Does anyone know why this is R by 4? Can you guess? So, if we only have a term of R, what is that indicating? Is it R by 4 or R by 2?
It can be 2 because both writes and reads can happen parallel.
Yeah, so you were saying something?
So at one time we can update only one entry.
Okay.
Whenever we write something, we have to update the parity bit. So at the
Yeah,
same
so that is the bottleneck. So this is bottleneck by the fact that no matter how much things you do in parallel, we only have a single parity disk, which requires a read and a write. Before that, let's look at this additive algorithm. So let's say we want to write 0 to disk 1. We first read in the old value. We read the old value of parity, so 2 reads. If the new value is the same, do nothing. If the new value is changed, you have to strip parity and write a new value. So 2 reads, 2 writes. And now let's say we get 2 writes, disk 0 and disk 1. So we have to make 2 writes to disk 0 and disk 1. Which means a write to this and a write to this. This is being done at random. Now both wait to read and write the parity disk. Because the parity disk is common to all of these. And the throughput becomes R by 2. Because for the you can do the operations in parallel on the parity disk. You require 2 operations to be done on the parity disk, read and write, and in parallel you can do the read and the write of the disk. So that is in fact not even the bottleneck. So we have a large number of requests coming randomly. You will be eventually bottlenecked by the speed of the parity disk, which is going to be R by 2 in this case because you require 2 operations. So this is one interesting case where it's independent of n. So no matter how many disks you put, random write is always going to be a factor of how fast or quick you can do. So you might want to choose a really quick parity disk in this particular case. So even though you might have other disks which are okay speeds, but putting a better speed parity disk can make some difference. And latency becomes 2D for a write operation, random or sequential write in this case. because you require 2 parallel reads and 2 parallel writes.
So how do you know that this one or this two has failed?
Sorry,
How
it's done at random. So we just sorry.
my how do you know that particular disk has failed? Is it always very? Can we always know that like, this disk has failed? Is it not a random or something we don't know which one has failed? Like there is one case when one disk is giving us wrong values and we don't know which one is that.
Right.
So, is that the case, or every time we can predict or we can determine that this disk has failed?
So
So we are assuming that we always know this one has failed.
So that's the assumption that we're taking. We know when a disk has failed, but how do we know that we have not started? I don't know a definitive answer to that. Because then it also goes into the zone of what kind of a failure. Is it only some particular sectors have failed? Is it the connection has failed, or is it data corruption, or is it a case of incomplete write? So there can be many various reasons, but I don't know an exact definite answer to that. So we saw that for RAID 4, the bottleneck is that we have a single parity disk. How do we overcome that? So distribute the parity across different disks. So that's the simple idea, which means that instead of having just a single parity disk, we now store the parity across these different disks. So in terms of capacity, this has the same capacity as the previous one, because you're still storing one particular bit per disk in the parity disk. Still, a single disk can fail, because if a single disk fail, you can still be able to compute the parity based on the others. Latency is going to be the same as RAID 4. There is no difference between them. In terms of throughput, that's the interesting thing. So, sequential read, what do you think is going to be the throughput? Will it change? No. Sequential write remains the same. The random write is the interesting case, where it becomes now n into r by 4, which was the answer to the previously given also. For RAID 4, this was r by 2. So this is given as n cross r, which is, so in the textbook it's mentioned that you can now read, you can utilize the full capacity of it. I'm still not fully convinced why this is n cross r. Does anyone have an idea why this is the case?
So you can read from any disk.
You can read from any disk, but still you're going to read that particular parity disk also.
So it's just the parity disk. And last
There is no definitive parity disk, but on average you still be reading one bit which is not required right.
So usually I won't even go for the parity bit right. I just I'll be randomly trying to read some data I want. That data can be spread across all in.
Okay, but
So
probably you can also still read so like when you're trying to read.
So while reading, you don't need to access the parity.
I see. Okay, I see that. Because the parity is firstly already known to you, and when you're trying to read, you don't require that unless there's a case of read. Okay, why is this n into r cross 4?
Because two disks can be accessed for one random.
And there'll be 4 operations. Right. So n into r cross 4.
And how would we know in what is the parity is good for that?
So I think it's deterministic. So it's just a simple rule. So for example, something like the following. So you just create a simple function where you just use a modulo function and you put the different parity bits in it. So that's one difference between what we've been seeing in RAID versus what we've been seeing in virtual memory systems. That here all the things are usually deterministic. Which block goes to which disk is also deterministic, and which disk now serves as a parity bit for which write, so that is also deterministic. So now a quick comparison of different RAID approaches. Can you see the title? Reliability and capacity. So RAID 0 had reliability of 0, which means no disk can fail. This is the number of disks which can fail. We just look at the other, all of them had some mechanism to start measuring this parity, so one disk would fail in all of these. In terms of capacity, we saw that RAID 0 has a maximum capacity, which comes because of reliability, C cross n. RAID 1 mirrors everything, so C into n cross 2. RAID 4 and RAID 5 have n minus 1 because you're storing a parity in each of them. In terms of read and write latency, RAID 4 and RAID 5 have 2D. So there is twice the latency because there is additional write required.
So the throughput is
Sorry.
the throughput of grateful.
Yeah, so that is the interesting thing. That while both of them have the same read and write latency, the throughput of RAID 5 is better, which we just calculated. That's because of the way we have designed the parity bit not to be the bottleneck. And if we look at all the other throughput cases, we can now see that RAID 5 is strictly better than RAID 4. But then, why would you still sometimes prefer RAID 4? Sorry. And what is driving the cost?
How to scale?
Sorry.
To add more tests.
So you have to add more. You have to add some more logic. That's the simple answer. Because otherwise you're just fixing the parity test. Whereas in this case you'll have to add some complex circuit. Not complex circuit, but some circuit. You'll have to add. And now we just compare RAID 0, 1, and 5 because 4 is strictly worse than 5. So we can see that RAID 0 is always the fastest, which is expected, but at the cost of reliability. And RAID 5 is better than RAID 1 for sequential in both the cases. But in terms of the random write, RAID 1 is better. So some interesting trade-offs usually come. Yeah, so in summary, there are many engineering trade-offs which you can make: capacity, reliability, and different types of performance. Depending on the types of workloads, we'll be choosing some RAID levels. So now most people, so now RAID 4 doesn't make a lot of sense when you have RAID 5 for such systems. And again, RAID 5 is a beautiful example of how we can do some simple optimizations to reduce the bottleneck. And now RAID is popular because it's transparent to the cloud. So this ends our discussion on RAID, and we've also finished our discussion on file systems. Now we have one chapter left, which I would